Hey, it's Ed. Before we get started, I want to thank two brand new podcast supporters, Zach Taylor and Jim Howell. If Jim Howell sounds familiar, it's because he's been on the podcast twice. And if you haven't listened to those episodes, I definitely think you should go back and take a listen. They're really, really good, and they're two of the most popular episodes I have. So check those out. Lots of good book recommendations in there. But Jim and Zach, really, really appreciate the support. If anybody else wants to support it, you can go to mountainandprairie.com/support and check it out. Thanks so much. Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie Podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative individuals who are shaping the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in land conservation, or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time up high in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, adventurers, pretty much anyone who's doing important work, has an interesting story, and loves the American West. My guest today is Jay Kleberg. Jay is a conservationist who is currently the Associate Director of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation. He's also the co-founder of Explore Ranches, a new company that connects outdoor enthusiasts to some of the most iconic private ranches in Texas and beyond. Jay has built his career and life around a deep respect for the land and an inborn sense of responsibility to protect these landscapes, as well as the wildlife and heritage they support. As a sixth-generation Texan and landowner, responsible land stewardship is in Jay's blood. And as you'll hear in our conversation, he's laser-focused on leaving Texas an even better place than he found it. Growing up on his family's large-scale South Texas working ranch, Jay's been closely connected to the land for as long as he can remember. After high school and college on the East Coast, Jay headed to Brazil for several years, where he worked with renowned conservationist John Kane Carter to protect the region's threatened landscapes. It was in Brazil that Jay began to hone his personal conservation philosophy and had a number of crazy adventures along the way. After a stint in for-profit real estate and earning his MBA, Jay decided to focus all of his professional energy on conservation in his home state. Jay and I have been friends for over 25 years, so it was a real treat to connect with him on the podcast to discuss our shared passions for land conservation and adventure. We normally just retell hilarious stories from high school the whole time. As usual, we covered a lot. We discussed his upbringing on his family ranch and lessons learned from both his family members and the larger ranch community. We talk about his time in Brazil, the conservation challenges in that region, and one close call on a small airplane that could have been the end of Jay. We also discuss Explore Ranches, his work with Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation, his role in the upcoming film The River and the Wall, and some of his adventures throughout the West. We talk about the importance of humility and honesty, benefits of having a for-profit mentality in the nonprofit world, and his favorite books, films, and much more. Be sure to check out the episode notes for a full list of topics that we discussed and links to everything. I know you're going to enjoy this episode, so here it is, Jay Kleberg. When you meet somebody for the first time, never met them, they come up to you and they say, "So what do you do?" How do you answer that question?
I say that I'm Associate Director for Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation, which is the nonprofit partner to the state's Fish and Wildlife and Park Agency. And my primary objective within that organization is to conserve habitat for the benefit of wildlife and people. And I think generally my sort of focus over the last 5 to 10 years has been on conserving land, primarily in Texas, and enabling more access to land, whether that's on private or public property. And I guess more recently have started a company called Explore Ranches and finished up earlier this year a film about a trip that 5 of us took from El Paso to the Gulf of Mexico, but all of it really focused on habitat and wildlife and public access.
Awesome. And that's enough to fill up like 3 or 4 hours talking about all that in detail. So maybe maybe let's start by talking about Explore Ranches, since that's the newest thing, and you can talk a little bit about that, and then I'm going to have one of your co-founders come on later to go into great detail. But can you just talk a little bit about that idea and kind of how it all played out?
Sure. So we, three of us who are all landowners, formed Explore Ranches and launched an online platform on December the 3rd that houses currently 8 ranches, 7 of which are in Texas and one of which is in Steamboat Springs, to allow those properties to market their amenities, their accommodations, their recreational opportunities on a limited basis to outdoor enthusiasts and travelers. And the idea sort of came out of my upbringing, which was on a working ranch in South Texas that's been in my family since the mid-1800s. And over that time, we've built a sustainable operation with multiple revenue sources that really the focus of all that income production is really to keep a large swath of native South Texas habitat intact. And we've got the benefit of 160 plus years of doing all that. And not all landowners, especially in a state that's 95% privately owned, have that luxury of either having, large acreage or, a business enterprise to help them hold on to open space and to steward that. At the same time, with my work at Parks and Wildlife Foundation, I've seen over the years and some work with Grand Canyon National Park that we've got public spaces, but a lot of them are in high demand, and so connecting people with the outdoors is also a huge incentive of mine. And so we created this business to connect outdoor enthusiasts and landowners that have wildlife habitat and these just amazing scenic parts of the country, so that they can hold on to that land for generations to come. Because when they do, that ultimately benefits all of us, and that in connecting outdoor enthusiasts with those opportunities, they fall in love with it. They connect or reconnect with the outdoors, and then hopefully, that creates kind of a cycle in which they become conservationists and have a conservation ethic with their interaction with those landowners.
Yeah, I think that's a powerful way to look at it, because that's how I got into conservation, is just through spending time outdoors as a kid and that connection, and then one thing led to another, and now it's basically my full-time job. And so I don't think when people hear that, people who may not have experienced it may think that's there are a lot of steps between spending time outside and being a conservationist. But I think you and I are both proof that that's how it happens. Do you agree with that?
Right. No, absolutely. And I think it starts with access. And if you don't live in Texas, having access to the outdoors, and especially in the Western United States, it's a little bit different when you go east of the Mississippi. But if you're in Colorado or Montana, you just step outside your front door, and within a few minutes, you've got access to some either national forest or a national park or a state park. It's pretty readily available. But in Texas, I happen to live in a city, Austin, that is really well connected with green belts, and there's a lake right in the center, a lake that is part of the Colorado River that sort of runs right through the center of the city. And so having access to and creating that connection with the outdoors is kind of second nature for a city like Austin. But you get outside of that in Dallas and Houston and some of these other places, and even in rural Texas, and there's definitely a barrier between wanting to get outdoors and then actually finding a place to go do that. And we're seeing that even in the hill country with some of the state parks that, they're relatively small and they're limited in terms of capacity. And so the summertime, there are, hour-long waits to get into some of these places. And so I think part of our job, in conservation is to pass on this conservation ethic. And you can't do that if you don't allow people to fall in love with the outdoors. And, and they've got to have access to it in order to do that.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think about, and we'll talk about our background together, but I think about that trip you and I took in high school out to Colorado as one of the defining points in my life that got me focused on a love of the outdoors. And I mean, I can trace it to that exact point. And so I think it's very, I think it's a great business idea, but I also think there's a lot of side non-monetary benefits to the business. And I think when you and I were initially talking about it, you described it as a Airbnb for ranches. Is that still kind of an accurate description?
Yeah, I think we're it is an accurate description. There's a spectrum on which each of these ranches sit. So I think Airbnb is sort of on one end of the spectrum. That's a choose your own adventure. That's not necessarily a guided trip. You've got access to accommodations and 2 to 10,000 acres of essentially your own private wildlife preserve, if you will. And at the other end of the spectrum is a fully guided experience that involves the landowner and meals and everything. So we're trying to offer a little bit of everything to folks who maybe don't feel as comfortable going out into the outdoors on their own and really need, someone to sort of interpret what they're seeing and guide them along the way. But for, an elevator pitch, Airbnb for ranches will do.
And so, like I mentioned a minute ago, I'm going to have one of your co-founders come on soon to go into all the details. But could you just give a quick run through on the team that is behind Explore Ranches? Because you got some cool people on board.
Sure. Allison Ryan, who will be on the show here soon, she grew up in El Paso. That's kind of our connection, because I spent about 8 years out there, and we both ended up in Austin. She's a landowner. She and her family own a property in the Davis Mountains, which is in the kind of north of Marfa in West Texas, some of the most biologically rich environment in Texas, the third largest peak in Texas, not too far from Guadalupe Peak, which is the highest. And she is facing similar situation that a lot of private landowners are, in that her it will be her responsibility in the next decade or more to try and hold on to and improve the property that she and her family own. And so part of this idea came out of her personal struggle, because they've got some really rugged landscape. They are limited in terms of what they can do on that property. It's not great grazing habitat. They've got a conservation easement on it through the Nature Conservancy. They're attached to tens of thousands of conserved acreage around them. And she started taking people here in Austin, mostly women, out on these guided trips to her place. And just the process of trying to market that was daunting, and so it really was the eureka moment for me. And I went out to go visit her and took some friends of mine who had spent a lot of time outdoors. One is now with Amazon, and the other one has spent a lot of time in Europe hiking around and skiing, and they were blown away. Number one, that they couldn't believe that it was that we were in Texas, and number two, that for them it was a foreign concept that someone actually owned a mountain, or owned a canyon.
Yeah,
and they said, "Man, you've got something here." And so we started brainstorming the three of us, and the third partner is Jess Womack, who you and I went to high school with, and he has been in the ranch operation business for, his family for multiple generations, but he himself operating his family's property on the Texas Gulf Coast for over a decade. And he's dealing with the same issues. You have to diversify your income, and he's been trying to figure out, a way to continue to hold on to that property and improve the habitat. And so we kind of put our heads together and said, if we could help these landowners spread the word about what they're doing and the value that they're providing to the public, also generate some income for them, and then provide outdoor enthusiasts with some access, then we think we've got something. And so we spent the last 8 months contacting landowners around the state and outside of Texas, and have ended up with close to 100,000 acres worth of private lands for people to recreate on.
That's awesome, man. I need to get Jess on the podcast, but I'm scared it would just be like the two of us kind of giggling the whole time, and I don't like telling silly stories. Well, I'll have links to Explore Ranches and to your social media and all that stuff, and then obviously we'll be talking with Allison in detail, so people can check it out now and then listen back in for more detail on that. I want to talk about your kind of personal journey to full-time conservation as well, because you've got such an interesting background, and we linked up, it was like 25 years ago now, which is crazy. But before that, you grew up, as you mentioned, on a massive ranch in Texas, very closely connected to the land. Your family's been closely connected to land for, what are you? Are you like the sixth generation, seventh?
Sixth generation, yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, when you were growing up there, and that was just kind of your day-to-day life, was this conservation ethic that you've developed and that your family's developed, was that something that you guys talked about? Like, was it something your family would try to teach you about, or was it just kind of something that was always there and not really discussed, but you just kind of picked up on it over the years and it was a part of you, or maybe something in the middle?
Yeah, I think maybe in the middle. Growing up, probably through, I would say, before I went to high school, I went to school on the ranch with the sons and daughters of cowboys and spent my weekends and most of my summers working with them. And then during the hunting season, spent a lot of time out in the field. And then just generally my free time was outdoors all the time. I either had a bike or I had a motorcycle or I had a horse, and was just, it was, a pretty, now I realize, very unique way to grow up. And I think just through osmosis, learn that, there are all of these different facets to conservation and land management. We have cattle, we have a farming operation, we have hunting leases, which started in the mid 80s, really in Texas. Hunting leases have been over the years a way for most people to generate revenue that allows them to improve habitat. And before that time, you'd be hard pressed to find anyone, I think, before the mid 80s who believed that wildlife someday would actually be higher value than cattle. And that's true today. And so as I got into, high school and college and got really more as a shareholder of a company that owns land and agribusiness operations, more into the details of, what are the numbers and what does it actually take to do this? What's the science behind it? We started through some of my father's efforts years ago a wildlife research institute down in Texas, that down in Kingsville, that's associated with Texas A&M, and really provides science to the decisions that we're making, and not just that my family's making, but to 3 million or more acres of what's called the last habitat of South Texas prairie, and those landowners. So you're really now, as I've gotten older, realized that it requires a lot of work to conserve large landscapes, and you've got to have science, and you also have to have engaged stakeholders. And I feel like, at least up until my generation, this sixth generation, and hopefully with my kids, that's something that we pass on, is that you've got to be engaged, and that's really like at the heart of everything that I've been trying to do for the last 20 years or so, is educate people, but also find something that will engage them in the outdoors, because as we've been saying, that engagement equals falling in love, and that falling in love means that they're going to care for it and pass that on to their children.
So when you think back to being a kid and growing up there, say from as early as you can remember through college, obviously you were learning a lot from your parents and your other family members. Were there any other either people you knew or people you read about just that kind of influenced your thoughts on the importance of land stewardship, conservation? I mean, anybody or even any experiences you had that you look back and you're like, yeah, that was pretty influential in my thinking on all this?
Yeah, I spent some time in the Brazilian Amazon for about 3.5 years, and we were, myself and a couple that was, the wife was Brazilian born but had been trained at the TCU Ranch Management School, and her husband was a former airborne ranger, went to TCU Ranch Management School, and was from Texas, and ended up in Brazil with her managing some property, and had started a travel business set up very much like African safari operation. And we operated this travel business for a few years, and we had the former executive director of Texas Parks and Wildlife, a guy by the name of Andy Sansom, come on a trip with the executive director of Bat Conservation International and a landowner from South Texas. And we were trying at the time to figure out, how do we stave off what was and still is, it just kind of, it depends on the year, some of the highest rates of deforestation in the world are on what's called this transition zone between dry forest in Brazil and more tropical high forest like you might see in pictures. And he said, we had the same issue of, how do you address conservation on a large scale in Texas years ago, and how do you do it in Texas within a public agency with very little public land? Right now, Parks and Wildlife Department in Texas has about 1,400,000 acres of property that they manage. And then there's the University of Texas system and the General Land Office. But generally speaking, there's about 5% of Texas is managed by public entities, and the rest is private. And he said, we developed a long-standing now relationship with private landowners, and they were the key to everything. We had to incentivize them. We had surveys and a program that helped them to understand the biology of the wildlife and the wildlife habitat that they've got on their property. And it was something that we really hadn't honed in on in Brazil, and it's something that I've have sort of carried with me. Is it really comes down to whether it's civic engagement or political campaign or conservation, down to the landowner and the stakeholders on the ground. Mm-hmm. And it was something that was hugely impactful, and we ended up starting a landowner-based conservation organization and made some headway where some other international conservation organizations in Brazil hadn't been able to.
Yeah.
Because we just had a groundswell of support. And there's some things that I'm working on now that, I kind of continue to step back and realize that unless we have support from the people that this is actually going to impact on the ground, then we won't be successful in the long run.
So your time in Brazil, that was a good transition, because that was exactly what I wanted to talk about next. So was the guy you were working for, is that John Kane
Yes.
Carter? Is that right? Yeah.
Yep.
He's an interesting dude. And I've read a ton about him and heard a lot about what he has dealt with down there. And from the stuff I'd read, there was a time, I don't know if it's still the case, that it was pretty lawless down there. And so when you showed up, I mean, I'm sure you had spent time traveling a bit before that, but you show up and you live there. I mean, what kind of culture shock was that, going from the Northeast in college to all of a sudden, a version of the Wild West in Brazil?
Yeah, I think the shock was both culture and just how you described it, this just general lawlessness, and what felt like Texas and the American West in the 1890s, where you're basically at a point where the cattle drives are ending, and those routes that have been created through the cattle drives have enabled these small towns to pop up.
Yeah.
They were, resupply points basically in the Western United States, and where we were in the state of Mato Grosso is very much like Texas in that it's mostly privately owned. There's a 6 million acre indigenous reserve kind of right in the middle of it, around one of the tributaries to the Amazon River. So shock in terms of just the lawlessness, and also just the deforestation, like the rate at which and the size, because we flew everywhere. So I flew with John, and we took guests around for the first couple of years, and then my third year, I got my pilot's license in the States and did some of the flying on my own. And you see these 100,000, 200,000, 300,000 acre ranches that have been carved out of this immensely biodiverse region, and it wasn't over a 10-year period. It was like you were seeing hundreds of thousands of acres being deforested in a matter of 12 months.
Wow.
And they had a burning season. That forest does not traditionally burn like we see in the United States, of our evergreen forest or prairie. That tropical forest is not meant to burn, and they have a burning season now that lasts from like August through October, and that smoke. And I know this because I flew a single engine from the state of São Paulo up to Mato Grosso, kind of the center of the country, Brasilia, during that burning season, and the smoke was up at like 12,000 feet.
Wow. For
about 2,000 miles. So essentially, covering border, it would be like covering from the New Mexico border all the way up to Whitefish, Montana, or the ferny Elk River Valley up in the Canadian Rockies. I mean, just this huge expanse. So just the scale and we were trying to combat that. And I think, what I realized after spending, about 3.5 years and really trying to bring people in to support our efforts and get locals to support our efforts as well, with providing them with science and that, yield from some of the acreage that they already had, that they already deforested, would be better by keeping what they had and keeping some of that forest, because that forest generates rainfall and there's a cycle. Even then, the dynamics and the momentum of market economics, and kind of where Brazil is in terms of its economic cycles. It was a little bit too much. And so, I felt like as an outsider, and that's another thing I've realized, is some of the best conservation really has to come from locals, like from a local level. And that's one of the things that I realized is I would always be, a foreigner in that country.
So when you were down there, I'm sure it was just adventure after adventure, but what was, if you could pick one experience that was the craziest, like the craziest thing that happened to you, and that could be scary or funny or whatever, but what was the most intense?
Yeah. I had a friend come down from New York, and he was a reporter for a local newspaper in Manhattan, and he wasn't coming down to report on what I was doing. He was just coming down to visit, and it was his first time in South America, and I had just received my pilot's license. So I had, and for folks that are pilots, they'll know that this is a ridiculously small number of hours. I had like 70 hours under my belt, and was landing on some of the like shortest grass and dirt strips that you can like physically land on with a small plane. And John and I and my friend flew to actually to the center of the Amazon, and there's a river called the Roosevelt. Which so the River of Doubt. So we were
awesome book.
We were within a few miles of that. And if you've read the book, you realize, and it still is this way, that it's very remote. It takes about 3 days by boat to get in there. And so we were flying in to make contact with a tribe and do some scouting because we were looking at doing some trips up into this area because it's like really pristine, amazing fishing, like 70-pound catfish, huge piranha, and just absolutely wild. And so we're flying in, and what they teach you in school is you want to be able to land in a position so that if something happens before you touch down, that you can take off.
Yeah.
And so I come around over this runway, and I've got a river on one end, and I've got 100 to 120 foot trees at the other end of the runway. And near the river, they've cleared out. This was an old gold mining strip from like the 80s. They basically cleared out the rest of the runway, but it was filled with these huge tree stumps. Like they just didn't go to the bother of clearing them out.
Yeah.
And so I do a couple of circles around and realize, my best option here is to come up over the trees, come straight down and land it, because if something happens, I can at least pull up or go into the river or something. And so I do what's called a forward slip, and a forward slip is essentially allows you to drop like a brick out of the sky.
Uh-huh.
And I do that, and when I do that, I still pick up some airspeed, and this runway is like maybe 800 to 1,000 feet long, pretty short.
And what's a typical runway?
Typical runway, like if you're at an airport or something, and it's been a while, but I want to say like maybe 4,000.
Oh, damn, man! So
we're talking about like landing on the width of a city block. It's kind of what that might look like, maybe half of that. So I eat up half the runway, like just in what's called ground effect, because I'm just going too fast.
Mm-hmm.
And finally touch down, and it's dirt. And so I press on the brakes, and the thing locks up, and then it starts going faster. It starts skidding down the runway. And I remember looking over, and the manager of the property and the chef are looking at us like with this they couldn't believe, like incredulous look, kind of like waving as we go by, like, why are you going 80 miles an hour past the front of the runway? And we blow through the end of the runway, and I see what I think is the blade starting to come off. like in pieces. And what it was we were cutting through the grass. And finally, after about 50 feet or so, we like rock forward. The blade hits the ground in this kind of mulch, and then we rock back. And my buddy is like ash and sweating, and we all get out, and the manager comes out. He's like, "You guys okay?" And everybody was fine. And I was concerned. First of all, we landed within about 3 feet of a stump, which would have pulled the engine. If we'd hit it, it would have pushed it through the firewall into John and I.
Damn.
And so we dig it out, and I said, I think I can land that. Like, I think I can land it the way that we just came. And almost for nerves, because I knew we were going to be out for 3 days.
Yeah.
And to make sure that like the plane worked. Took it back up and
You're crazy,
and basically did the same maneuver, just like with a little bit more precision, and landed it, and everything was fine. And then a year later, I flew that airplane back to Texas and did what's called kind of like a recertification. They basically give it a new birth certificate. And, and they have to go through everything, and they took off the hub of the front of the propeller, and I had sheared off in that crash a bolt, and that bolt had been running around in the cone of the propeller. And he said it had worn a groove that was so thin that probably in the next 5 to 10 hours, it would have sheared off the cone, and that cone would have come back into the windscreen and into the cockpit. So I got super lucky.
Oh my God.
And my friend never flew with me, and my wife, for that reason, has taken very few trips with me in an airplane.
That's crazy. Well, I mean, that's crazy on a lot of levels. The actual event is crazy, but then the fact that you were flying that thing back to Texas, and I mean, is that the closest you've ever come to dying, you think?
You wonder, you look back on things like, man, that was really crazy that I know of. I mean, that was very, it was super close. I think if we'd gotten, any further, if we'd gone a little bit faster and gone any further down that runway, we would have hit one of those tree stumps, the one that was in front of us. And I think that engine would have come back. And in those planes, that firewall is basically as thin as a Coke can. And so, and that engine is, pretty big and heavy. And I think that would have probably been the end of John and me. My buddy probably would have survived. And since he's a writer, he probably would have had a pretty good story to tell.
Damn, man. You leave Brazil, come back. Is that when you move to El Paso and get in the real estate business?
Yes. Moved to El Paso, got married in 2005, and my wife moved out there, and she was actually doing work for the Peregrine Fund at that time. And so it was great. It was a great move for both of us. I was in the commercial real estate business, and we were developing cross-border industrial parks, got into the ranch business as well in New Mexico, and was traveling into Tijuana and all the way down to Chihuahua and Monterey. And she was doing work in the Marfa Marathon area and up on some of Ted Turner's properties in New Mexico, and then just made some great friends. And, in a place that has the largest urban park in the United States with the Franklin Mountains, and pretty close to Ruidoso and Taos, and just some great. I mean, that for me was a little bit of an eye opener in terms of having that kind of unfettered access to public lands.
Sure,
because New Mexico just has some great access, and both mountains and deserts and some decent hunting. So we had a really amazing time there in El Paso.
And was at the time when you lived there, was it pretty rough? Like there was a point in the mid 2000s, I feel like, when there was a lot of crime along the border because of just some shifts in policy against drug cartels and things like that. Was it pretty wild down there at that point? At least the reputation
right.
Wild?
I mean, the facts are that Juarez was in 6, 7, and 8 the most deadly, dangerous place in the world. Just because of the murder rate. That being said, on the El Paso side, just because of the sheer, this isn't the only reason, but the theory being that you've got Customs and Border Protection, you've got one of the largest military bases in Fort Bliss there, so a lot of military personnel. You've got FBI has an office there. You just have a lot of like law enforcement presence, and so if humans and drugs are moving through El Paso, that's exactly what they're doing. They're trying to move through and get out.
Yeah.
And so we never locked our doors. It's always ranked for mid-sized cities in the United States as either the safest or the second safest city in the nation. And so we certainly saw it. And I think from El Paso's perspective, we also during that time saw the construction of the border fence under the Secure Fence Act, and so that for me was eye opening in seeing a community that truly is binational, that's 3+ million people that depends on it's like 1 out of every 8 or 9 jobs in El Paso is dependent upon the cross-border manufacturing business in Mexico.
Yeah.
So it's very, very much intertwined. You've got families and friends and loved ones that cross the border and have ties on both sides. And so for me, having grown up in South Texas, that kind of proximity was new and brought to light some of the issues and the realities that community was facing, and that really El Pasoans were trying to help Juarez figure out how to break that cycle of essentially what was cartel violence. And heard, I think one of the most impactful people that I heard while I was there was the mayor of Medellin. After Medellin sort of came out of the cartel crisis down there, and he described essentially how he and a group of friends a lot of them had been out of the country. He was a professor up at University of Wisconsin, came back, and they sat around and said, we've got to do something because our country is in turmoil, and we're the only ones, people are going to be the ones that bring it back. And so they drew straws for elected offices that they would all run for. And he drew the short straw for mayor of Medellin.
Oh, wow.
And this is like shortly after the time of Pablo Escobar. And so he runs, he loses, he actually runs again, and was just very successful in investing in some of the lower income parts of Medellin and giving people access to education and loans, and really building the city up, neighborhood by neighborhood. And I think Juarez has had still some fluctuations, but I think the economy is doing much better in Mexico, and you're seeing net negative or net zero migration of Mexicans out of the U.S. So you got more Mexican nationals leaving the United States than are actually coming in, and I think that's because the economy has improved. I mean, I think the United States needs to do more to invest there, and that's I think what will help stabilize that community. But just a really unique, more than any other border city, I think just a unique place in the world.
Yeah, well, it sounds like you had a great experience there. You had a great job. It was, a great community, just kind of a good all-around experience. So what prompted you to leave there? And if my chronology is right, you went to business school, and then after that started working for Texas Parks and Wildlife Foundation. So what kind of prompted the move from, or I guess the first question is, when you left, did you think, all right, I'm going to go into conservation full-time and an MBA is a good way to get there? Or was it, I need to figure out the next step, I'm going to get my MBA?
Yeah, I think my degree was in English and had some business experience, but I love tooling up, and I wanted some more education. And I also just enjoy I'm intellectually curious, and I also enjoy being around people with different backgrounds and perspectives. And, while business school attracts a certain type of person, I was interested to kind of see what other people were doing. And also, we had at that time a young daughter, and my family's in South Texas, and I've got a brother and sister that were in San Antonio, or at least a sister at the time. Just wanted to get a little bit closer to family.
Yeah.
And also, I think, see what else, at least as far as Texas goes, what else is out there. And, I really had been trying for a long time to try and figure out, how do I replicate what we were doing in Brazil? Large scale, what I thought was pretty difficult conservation work, but do it on my home ground. And business school, although that seems like an unusual path, was a way for me to get tooled up, give me some time, give me a couple of years to kind of figure out where that niche is. And I spent a lot of time while I was in business school talking to conservation leaders around the state about, what are some of the skill sets that you see in your industry, and also maybe some skills that are lacking. And I learned, having been in business school for about a year, and then I landed an internship with the National Park Service at the Grand Canyon, that my real estate background also was a huge asset. And so I really, wanted to take the next step and kind of look at prospects from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think, at least in my experience, we've got very similar backgrounds. I was in, for-profit real estate for a long time and have an MBA, and I think that combo is very effective and also very needed in conservation. At least in the Rocky Mountains, it is, and it sounds like it's the same in Texas. I think just having some of those hard skills that you can bring. Because you're dealing with very sophisticated people. It's very sophisticated transactions, very complex, and I mean, it sure as hell doesn't hurt. And it seems that, at least in Colorado, a lot of people are coming from a ecology standpoint or something along those lines. And so when you can bring those real skills, finance skills, I think it's huge.
Yeah, in addition to finance, I think another great skill that people may don't necessarily think about in terms of conservation is advocacy and marketing. You've got to be able to tell a good story, and you learn a lot in business school, and I think just in life, about measurable results. And I think that's, especially with these private public partnerships, that those measurable results is a trend among philanthropists, that they're no longer, gone are the days of just giving, several $1,000s a year to an organization because, it makes you feel good. And certainly that happens. But the big dollars in conservation are being raised because you're able to articulate a vision, and you've got some end goal in mind, and that you can measure those outcomes.
So you finish up business school, and I would guess that there are plenty of ways you could have gone. You could have gone work for the government, National Park Service. You could have worked for land trust. I mean, like big or small, Nature Conservancy. I was just in Austin recently and met some of the guys from the Hill Country Conservancy, and they were super cool. So why did you land on the Parks and Wildlife Foundation? What attracted you to that?
The ability to impact large swaths of Texas positively, both at the habitat level and at the recreational access level. I don't believe, and I'm obviously biased and am coming from a very particular perspective. There isn't another organization out there that's doing what Parks and Wildlife Foundation is doing, and it's in part because you've got a state agency that we support, and we can leverage the dollars that we raise 2 and 3 times with funds that really no other conservation organization in Texas has access to.
Yep.
And so those kind of basic facts, I thought, with this skill set, how can I get more people outside, and how can I help conserve, wild things and wild places in Texas? And it was really just by chance. I happened to be riding my bike from business school to home, and I ran into the executive director of Parks and Wildlife Department. Literally almost ran into him with my bike. He was coming out of the Capitol, and we had some mutual friends, one being John Carter. Mm-hmm. I said, I'm really struggling with this. I'm trying to figure this out. He said, let's go to lunch. And he at lunch described Parks and Wildlife Foundation, which I'd never heard of, and they were had just changed executive directors and were embarking on $100 million campaign. And they needed someone. I just really happened to fit the role, who could help them articulate through a business plan how they were going to both raise and spend those dollars.
Yep.
And I had done a business plan like 3 months earlier for Grand Canyon National Park. Uh-huh. And so I just happened to be in the right place at the right time.
Well, right place, right time, combined with years and years of preparation, and what do they call it? Sharpening the saw through all your,
right.
Education experience. You were ready for that.
Right. Yeah, totally.
So when you're thinking about Texas and conservation issues, what would you say is the biggest challenge facing Texas from a conservation perspective in the next 10 years? In Colorado, I think most people say water. There's going to be an issue with water out here, and there already are issues, but we got to figure out a way to deal with it. What would you say is the answer in your world?
I think it is related to water quality and quantity. I think land fragmentation is probably top of the list, just because we have such a rapidly growing population in Texas. We got a lot of people moving to Texas. You got these big sprawling cities, because unlike some other parts of the country, you're really not geographically constrained in Texas. The reason why, and we love to drive. And so we're eating up land in Texas at a very high rate. And so I'd say land fragmentation, access to water. We go through drought cycles, and we have for years, but those drought cycles are intensifying because of climate change. And so, we're seeing lakes that now are at 100%, but, a year and a half ago were at like 20-30% capacity.
Wow.
And these were man-made lakes that were built not only for water supply, but also for energy. And when you get into a real crisis situation, which we did, about 2 months ago, we had a boil water requirement here because we had so much rain. So we're going through these like huge extremes of drought and flooding that the water treatment facilities that provides all the drinking water for Austin was so backed up with silt that they had to stop and clean out the filtration system. And so all of Austin, including the restaurants, were having to boil the water. So a bunch of them shut down. And this was for like maybe 7+ days. So I think, maybe one other may just be, as we've got, I don't know if it's this way in the Western United States, but non-native species, whether you're talking about plants or we have infestation of zebra mussels that are detrimental to a lot of the lakes sort of north of Austin right now, in boats and other structures. And we've got large swaths of the Rio Grande that have carrizo cane, which is a non-native species, and a host of threatened and endangered species that need our attention. And I think the future's bright in that you've got a a lot of the issues have become acute in Texas. I mean, people, when your water gets turned off, or you start seeing your lawn turn brown in the summertime when normally it wouldn't because you're on a water restriction. I think people can touch and feel, and in the news they're reading about climate change and a lot of these things, and drought and flooding are. They have personal experience with them. I think while all of that is bad, I think it does raise awareness, and hopefully, I know that we're doing a lot in terms of access to water in the state, and hopefully, we'll do more. And a lot of that is actually tied. There's some revolving loan funds out of the state for land conservation, so they're making that connection between, if you protect open space, then you're protecting the watershed and aquifers and environmental flows that hopefully end up in bays and estuaries. So I think people are starting to connect the dots, at least.
Yeah, I think I hate seeing it happen, but some of these very acute these acute crises that pop up, especially related to water, I think it's like they say in politics, don't let a crisis go to waste. And I mean, I think those are great opportunities, really, because it's only going to get worse if something isn't done. So, man, we're already at 55 minutes, which is crazy. I told you we could do it for like 4 hours. We have to talk about Woodbury because so we kind of came from very opposite ends of the country. You from South Texas, me from Eastern North Carolina, but we both ended up in the foothills of Virginia at Woodbury Forest. And I think we both just absolutely loved that place and loved the experience we had there and the friendships. Can you talk a little bit about maybe how you chose to go to Woodbury and then the biggest lessons learned from your time there, other than how to do good pranks and tell funny jokes? How'd you end up choosing Woodbury?
I had family that had attended Woodbury for decades, or over the decades, and that's how I was aware of the opportunity, and the educational prospects for me in South Texas weren't great, and on top of that, I was just like really attracted to this idea that really, for 4 years, you get to focus on academics and athletics. As nerdy as that sounds, that was like really attractive to me. And so I personally felt like I thrived in that environment, because if you wanted to really focus on the academics and get engaged in athletics. And I think since we've left the arts and other, if you had an interest, there was an avenue for you there.
Yep.
And you could find a group, not just a mentor, but you could also find a group of people that would get involved in those activities with you. And so I think the biggest things that I learned from Woodbury were probably, realizing that this sounds really cheesy, but like we truly do have a voice. Mm-hmm. And there were certainly some times and some opportunities where I think if not for what we learned at Woodbury, both while we've been in school and then since then, I probably wouldn't have stood up and said something or stood out and tried to right a wrong. Mm-hmm. And then I think the honor code there, and you hear that a lot from Woodbury graduates, is it's very strict. And yes. I still carry that with me. And I think it's shaped also the kind of people that I've surrounded myself with.
Yes.
That have really strong character. And then the last thing that I've carried with me to this day is, we had a pretty regimented, and this is not everybody at Woodbury, but there was, if you were involved in sports, like for me, I got into this routine of, working hard all day and then taking a couple of hours at least out of the day to focus on athletics and team sports and yourself. And I've carried that with me, and all of the, I think, mental fortitude that comes with that, and teamwork, and all of those things. I'm sure you learn. I mean, I don't have an alternative perspective, but I feel like we got that in spades. All of those things through that education.
Yeah, I agree. It's such a formative age, from 14 to 18, I guess. You were there a year before me, so I got there when I was 15, but it's a really cool experience and just hard to measure the impact of being in a place like that where you're rewarded for doing all the right things. You're rewarded for being honorable, for not lying, cheating, stealing, for not putting up with anybody that does, for, working extremely hard academically, working extremely hard athletically. I don't know that I'll ever have a schedule as tight as it was at Woodbury. I mean, it was from 7 a.m. to 1 a.m., at least senior year, and class on Saturdays, that people can't believe that. But, and I just loved it. And I don't know, I would be a completely different person without that experience, for so many different ways. And the cool thing about it is that they've maintained those standards. I mean, here we are 25 years after we got there, and it's even better than it was when we were there.
Yeah.
It's cool.
I have kind of continued or try. I'm not sure that I'm always successful at it to like maintain that schedule. Obviously with, we weren't having to take care of kids and maintain a relationship with a significant other and a job and all those things. But I've tried to kind of meld that replicate that mold of a schedule of just sort of getting after it and doing as much as is humanly possible in a day, and hopefully, at some point reaping the benefits of that.
Yeah, I'm at my best when I'm that way, and I always think back to, this is how I was at Woodbury. This is how the schedule was at Woodbury. And somebody was making me do it then, whereas now it's, it all has to be self-motivated, but that's the baseline. And I've just found in a million different ways, that's the goal on a daily basis for me. So, and I think if you talk to guys from class of 1950 or guys from class of 2018, they would all say a similar thing, which is pretty unique. Yeah, what a great experience, and a funny experience too. We won't go into some of the other stuff. Well, so real quick, will you just tease your upcoming film, and then when it comes out, we'll talk more about it? Because I had Ben Masters on the podcast a long time ago. He was nice enough to come on when I think I'd done like 6 episodes or something. And so, can you just kind of give a tease of that, and then we'll talk about it in detail when it comes out?
Sure. So to preface it all, look for the film to premiere in the spring of 2019, and then we'll do a festival run subsequent to that, and then hopefully, we'll be streaming sometime in the summer and fall. But the film is based on a trip that 5 of us did by horse, bike, and canoe from El Paso to the Gulf of Mexico, along the Texas-Mexico border and the Rio Grande River, to understand the impacts of a proposed contiguous border wall. And so we started December 1st of last year, 2017, at the Texas-Mexico-New Mexico border, and spent 72 days on the river, and had just a varying set of backgrounds. Ben's a director and horse guy. I've got some conservation and private and public lands experience. We had a river guide whose parents are from Guatemala originally, who immigrated without documentation in the 70s to Texas, and he was subsequently born in Austin. His name's Austin, and lives out in the Terlingua area as a river guide. And then Heather Mackey, who's an ornithologist trained at Cornell and is now at UCLA, and just an all-round badass. She, after we finished our trip, roughly February the 15th, several months later, soon after she finished her degree, she rode with her father from Canada to Mexico on a mountain bike. So she's definitely got the endurance bug. And then Philippe D'Andrade, who's a host on Nat Geo Wild,
cool.
and he's got his own immigration story. And so since then, I mean, we finished the film back in February and have been doing, Ben and I and Hillary, the producer, have been doing talks around the state. We went up to D.C. last week and did a private screening for some staffers, some congressional staffers, and had Senator Udall from New Mexico and Congressman O'Rourke and Congressman Hurd from Texas there in an attempt to try and relay to folks what the damage to access to water in the middle of a desert, migration patterns of wildlife. And, the last thing I'll say is people don't understand that, if you look at where the existing fence is, and there's 700 miles of it, 136 of it in Texas, west of Texas, it's pretty much like on straight lines.
Yeah.
But when you look at that fence in Texas, it's a quarter to 3/4 to up to a mile right now from the river, which is the international boundary itself. And so when we're talking about a contiguous border wall in Texas, at least, you're separating Texans from the Rio Grande, number one, and number two, you're ceding over 1 million acres to the south side of the wall, which essentially becomes a no man's land, which in Texas should be cause for revolution and revolt. And so we're just trying to get the information out, and hopefully this film will help.
I can't wait to see it. Unbranded is one of the best documentaries I've ever seen, and this one, it looks like it's going to be that, times 3 or 4. I mean, it's just going to be awesome because there's so much. It's a current issue that needs to be explored, and a lot of goods can come from that. So I can't wait to see it. We'll get back on here and talk about it when it comes out.
Sure.
And then one more thing, and then I want to ask you some quick questions. I wanted to talk about your humility, and then that was a perfect example because you were talking about the person in the film who rode her bike from Canada to Mexico, and you just happened to glaze over that you did that as well. You didn't mention that you did that as well.
Opposite direction.
Oh, you rode the other way.
No. Yeah, I rode the other way, so it wasn't it was a non sequitur.
Well, one of the things, ever since I've known you for 25 years, you're from Texas, you grew up on a big ranch, you're a great athlete, smart, the whole deal, and so that seems, if you think about that is a formula for being a loudmouth or being arrogant or being cocky, but you're the exact opposite. So where did that come from? Like, because that is not your stereotypical Texas. And so is that a family thing? Has that been drilled into your head, or is it just how you were born? I don't know your brothers and sisters. Maybe they're real loudmouths.
Super arrogant. Yeah, I mean, they really they pushed me to this humility.
Massive cowboy hats.
And it's funny that we're talking about humility on a podcast all about me. So I appreciate that plug. Honestly, it comes from my parents.
Yeah.
But your parents can only tell you so much. I think certainly the way they carry themselves and the way that they act and care about people in a very small agrarian community where everyone it's a very cooperative environment, and then I think growing up with cowboys and their children, and they didn't allow you to get away with anything.
Yeah.
They didn't take any shit.
Yep.
And so if you didn't carry your weight around the pins, or you fell off horseback, or you were no good, then they had no use for you. And
sure.
And there were no, certainly I was aware that my father was one of the bosses. And so I think I was ultra sensitive to that and overcompensated and tried to be, as best as I could possibly be at like every thing that I did, so that there was no excuse for anybody to handle me any differently. Mm-hmm. And that carried through to school on the ranch, and really trying to prove myself, like prove that there was something beyond just a facade. And I think like what I realized too, and hopefully I think I hope that everyone realizes this, although we're seeing, I guess, that bear out differently with our administration currently, that it does no good to talk about yourself and to not be a team player. At least I think in the long run, it doesn't. Like, you get so much more accomplished if you're in it as a collective rather than for yourself, because I think people see through that, and so I just have no use for not being humble. It just doesn't, maybe that's selfish in its own way, right?
No, I think in a way you wouldn't say this because you're too humble, but I think I think humility is ultimately a sign of confidence. I think the people that are mouthing off and talking real big, and they're, it's, the older I get, the more I realize that they're obviously trying to cover up something. And the people, I see it time and again, and basically every single person I've had on this podcast is like that. They're just humble about what they're doing, and they're passionate about what they're doing. And that comes from a deep inner confidence that some of it's inborn and a lot of it is built up through, just working your ass off. Yeah. And, I think you can gain a lot of confidence just by hard work, which is clear you do, academically, athletically, and professionally. So anyway, I'm glad we got a guy like you on the side of conservation, because it's, there's some big challenges.
Yeah. Well, my dad says, always says, just get after it. And, it's such an interesting time to live in, where creating brands is no longer the responsibility solely, or the playing field of companies. Mm-hmm. It's been brought down to the level of the individual, yep, which is extremely empowering. But at the same time, like for me with this film and with other things, it's like it's so against how I operate, to try and promote like myself. Yeah. But there's almost like a requirement to do that, not necessarily to promote yourself, but promote what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And I've been trying to learn from Ben and from others that, there is a balance there, and it doesn't have to be about yourself. I think some people add a lot of that because they've got an audience that's interested in that personal stuff. But what I like about social media and the current state is that you do have, platform, and I think everyone, or a lot of people have, interesting things to say. And if what we're doing, what you're doing and others is ultimately for the betterment of society, then get after it, and not just do, but also try and educate people about what you're doing and what some of the challenges are.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. I've thought about that exact thing, and I think what you're doing, and to an extent what I'm trying to do here, is it's not about me or it's not about you. It's about getting these ideas out there, and it's kind of like a service to the people who are interested, and just the more info, the better. And I feel like that's exactly what you're doing in everything you've got going on. So anyway, keep it up. And let me go through a few of these quick questions, and I'll let you get back to your important. Or you're just kind of sitting around today, right? You're just kind of taking it easy, feet up on the desk.
Slippers and pajamas, like those silky pajamas, kind
smoking
of a baby
jacket.
Blue.
Nice.
Yeah, well, more of a baby blue. I'm kind of like a Motown, Motown guy. So yeah, just hanging out.
Cool. All right. So I've asked pretty much everybody on the podcast these questions. It's good to compare the answers. What, if any, is your favorite books about the American West? Do you have any that come to mind?
Empire of the Summer Moon is kind of a Texas book, but it's about Native American culture and sort of the end of an era. And although Stephen Ambrose has come under fire over the last decade or so, man, Undaunted Courage is so good. And I love that stuff. If I could have taken that job with Lewis and Clark, or have been one of them, I would have taken it. And then it's not necessarily about the West, but there's a book called The Nature Fix.
Oh, I just read that. So good.
By Florence Williams.
Yeah, so good.
And all the things that you and I know and feel when we're outdoors, she's able to scientifically and neurologically quantify, like the benefits. And talking about backcountry brain.
Yep.
And essentially, if you're outdoors and in open space for a couple of days, you start to, like, your mind starts to expand. You become more creative. And that was one of the aha moments for me in this company with Explore Ranches, is if we could enable more people to have those moments outdoors, then, we're doing a service, not only to the environment, but to them and their mental health.
That's a great book. And I thought the same thing. I thought I already know all this, but I didn't have any data to back up what I thought I knew. And so that's a great book. I think everybody should read that. Do you have any favorite documentaries or films? So
because it's relatively recent, we went to Telluride Mountain Film Fest this last year and saw The Dawn Wall.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
Tommy Caldwell.
Sure.
And just, I love movies that I assume I know what it's about going into it, and then it just blows my mind in terms of the story and the characters. And this is one of those, like, adventure-based movies that has some real depth to it and really, like, dives into someone's intestinal fortitude and their character and the strength and, like, what it takes to be what I heard someone say on a panel recently. There's extra in extraordinary, and Tommy Caldwell has that extra effort and mental toughness to have done what he did in Yosemite.
And he's missing a finger too.
Yep.
Which is insane for a rock climber. He's a hard ass.
Yeah.
I want to get him on the podcast at some point.
And you know what? This just one comes to mind real quick. Because he was on our crew and was a big part of Unbranded. Phil Baraboo's Charged. And I know you've had Eduardo on the podcast.
I've had Becca, his wife
story.
or his fiance, and I'm hoping to get Eduardo on soon.
Okay.
But what a cool dude. I mean, just a really that movie's awesome. Yeah, those are both great. This will be funny. So you got a lot going on. You do long distance mountain biking, triathlons. You got 3 girls. I mean, you're full speed. Is there any activity you do that would be surprising? That's maybe funny or weird? You're sitting around in baby blue pajamas right now, apparently.
Well,
anything else?
Yes, that's a good segue. We have an entire closet of wigs and costumes, and we had someone come over to help my wife with, like, storage. They come in and they help you, like, put together racks and things like that.
Yeah.
And she came downstairs, like, with really wide eyes and kind of, like, left awkwardly. And I was like, what happened? And she ends up calling my wife later, and she's like, I don't mean to pry, but what are all those wigs doing up in that, like, secret closet upstairs? She's like, I can explain. We love Halloween and costume parties. So we have a bunch of wigs, and I've got a Teen Wolf outfit that I pull out every couple of years. And I even went van surfing a few years ago when I was a little bit younger. And for those that don't know, that's a scene in Teen Wolf, the movie with, I think it was Jason Bateman. No, it was Michael J. Fox.
Michael J. Fox.
The original was Michael J. Fox. So anyway, I've dressed up as Britney Spears just for, my I have daughters, so just for their sake. So anyway, that's something my wife and I, a good, clean fun that we enjoy.
Jay's an excellent dancer too. I remember at Richard Wright's wedding, you were taking care of business.
And in high heels, it is extremely challenging, I have to say.
So what is your favorite location in the West, if you had to pick one?
Okay, so this is non-U.S., so don't shoot me.
No, that's
but
right.
The Elk River Valley between Fernie, like essentially north of Whitefish and Rooseville,
Oh, yeah,
Montana.
yeah. Okay.
You go the Elk River Valley. When we were on our mountain bike trip, flooded. But even in those circumstances, from Fernie north to Banff, the Rocky Mountains are extremely severe, and the valley is relatively narrow.
Yep.
And so you've got these amazing lakes. So you're riding or you're hiking or you're driving through this valley with these, peaks that emerge 5,000-6,000 feet above you, and they're snow capped, and these like moss ringed, fern covered lakes. I mean, it's just like a magical place, and I'll never forget it. And I want to go back. Like if I were to do a section of that again, that Great Divide mountain bike route again, I would do the Gila because it's so hard.
Yeah.
And I would do parts of, most of Montana just because it's so wide open, and that Elk River Valley is just spectacular.
I've never been up there. I'll add it to my list.
Amazing.
My ever-growing
Please.
list.
Yeah.
So next to the last question, if you could make a request of the people that listen to this podcast, and it's people that love the American West in one way or the other, have an interest in conservation, either in ranching or athletics or art, just people that love the West. If there's something, offer some words of wisdom or offer some advice. Is there anything that comes to mind?
I would say, and I guess I've said it, maybe it's a common theme over the last hour or so, is to get engaged, because like what I've seen is we've got about a 900 member organization that we started at Parks and Wildlife Foundation to engage 21 to 45 year olds that are mostly city based professionals in real estate or government or oil and gas. And a lot of them either grew up in rural Texas, or they had parents that hunted and fished and hiked and did all those things, but they live in cities now and they just don't get out anymore. And we've seen over the last 5 years that this group of 900 people now are hunting. They're taking first-time hunters, and a group of people that have basically been left behind by conservation organizations because they're too old. They're right in the middle, right? They're not 10 years old or 15 years old, and people feel like, well, you can't change their behavior. And they're not old enough for some conservation organizations, especially that are raising money, to care about, because they haven't yet made enough money to give much back.
Yeah.
But that's an entire group that has the time, and in some cases has the means to get out and get engaged. And then once they're equipped, they're taking more, of their friends outdoors, and so we're providing those opportunities for people to get educated. And for me, like for over my lifetime, just caring about something and taking the risk of maybe losing potentially some time, getting engaged in something I'm interested in is a reason why I've lived the life and kind of where I am now, is because I just kind of got interested in something and then got more and more engaged in it and met people that were in that community, and feel like, have done what I can so far, and taken some of those opportunities.
You're getting after it. The dad's advice. That's
right.
I got a coffee mug that says "Get After It" on it. You should get one of those. So how can people connect with you online, connect with Explore Ranches, the new film, all that?
Yeah. So Jay Kleberg, JayKleberg, Instagram and Facebook. The company is Explore Ranches, and that's just simply exploreranches.com. We also have Instagram and a Facebook page where people can check out some of our videos and footage of some of the properties that we have listed, and Parks and Wildlife Foundation as well for folks that are in Texas. tpwf.org. And then finally, The River and the Wall is at theriverandthewall.com, I believe. And if you just Google The River and the Wall, you'll see, Instagram and Facebook and other channels, and look for that to premiere hopefully in March of this next year.
Awesome, man. I'll have links to all that. But thank you so much for your time. Thanks for everything you're doing. It's crazy. I think they were tape recorders were the rage when you and I first met, and now we're doing this. Anyway, I really appreciate it. Hey, this is Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountainandprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.